John Jones?
Oh, arguably the GOAT. There's a bit more viciousness and potentially malice behind his shots. He's there to hurt you.
Yeah.
And again, we're fighters, but he definitely has a bit more compared to most that I've seen.
So how do you maintain what you need in order to stay disciplined?
For everything that we want, there is a cost. And for me, if I want to get there, the cost is putting in the work now when I don't necessarily need to. Got my graduate in physiotherapy from King's College London.
The O2 in Greenwich,
Yes.
lightweight title, 21st of February 2025.
With the 4-ounce gloves on, anything can happen.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Koev. Today I'm joined by Yusuf Ali Taleb, a kickboxing and MMA fighter who has seen some incredible success, being the former UK number 2 and the K1 and WKU English and International champion. In addition to his fighting career, he's also an accomplished physiotherapist, having studied at King's College in London and now running his own successful physiotherapy clinic for fighters. Yusuf, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I really wanted to dive into your story and talk about how you sort of came into fighting in the first place. So what did your childhood look like a little bit, if you're happy to go into that? And then how did you transition into professionally pursuing fighting as a career?
So I'm happy to do so. I started off martial arts, it was a good 20 years ago now, or just over. So I started in 2004. Growing up in East London in Hackney, which is very different to what it is now. Hackney is a lovely place and was a lovely place, but it was just slightly more coloured in some ways in the past. But my parents knew and understood the environment and then therefore got us into martial arts, me and my siblings. My mum in particular is still doing Muay Thai and was doing Muay Thai at the time. And decided to take us all to the gym.
So actually it was your mother who was training when you were a child and
Yes.
brought you along to the gym with her?
Yes, correct. So especially at that time going into Muay Thai, both my parents are avid martial artists and were when we were growing up.
Amazing.
They did the typical sort of karate for a while and then did some Japanese jiu-jitsu and a few different arts in martial arts. So growing up, martial arts was definitely part of our household. Sort of family time orientated around watching some Jackie Chan films or some Bruce Lee films, etc.
Drunken Kung Fu Master.
Exactly. I mean, Jackie Chan was always my preference. There's a bit more comedy to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. That's essentially what the essence of our childhood was. So going into martial arts or going into a gym seemed a natural fit. It wasn't necessarily my choice at the time, nor was it the choice of my siblings for the most part. But the parents said, "This is going to be good for you."
And how old were you, if you don't mind me asking, when this happened?
So I was about 11. I was 11
Very young
years old,
then.
so young.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I do remember a small stint of trying karate as well, me and my brothers. So that took us down to the local karate club, and there was a period of maybe 6 to 12 months or so. And then we decided to leave that alone. So yeah, martial arts has definitely been part of our life for a long time. And again, we started it, we were told to do it. It then became such a ingrained part of my life throughout the years, without necessarily realizing at the time how significant it would be to this day.
Yeah.
It was something we continued to do throughout secondary school, going into college. And a lot of the time I just did it initially because I was told to do so. Not that I wanted to do. And then after that, I did have some enjoyment in it as well.
Yeah. When did that transition occur? Because obviously you felt like you were doing it because you had to as a kid, right? Yeah. I mean, I can't remember as a child being really excited about working out. I enjoy playing sports with my friends, but that's different to like going and doing a strict training regime, right? Yeah. So when did that transition happen where you felt as though this is something I am actually enjoying and I want to take onto myself to pursue?
To be honest, there was definitely apprehension going into the first session. And then after that, it was quite fun. Naturally, I am quite competitive. Without realizing at the time, but it was good fun. It was quite a loose sort of class in that there was a lot of games involved and a bit more, learning, which I quite enjoyed. And then as you get a bit older into your sort of early to mid-teens, you then start making choices for yourself. Or do I want to go? Do I not want to go? And I think it was when I was probably 15 or so, where I was really, finding that I found enjoyment in it. And then went to college and realized actually what else do I want to do with my time. Again, I was going to a local college in Hackney, so as soon as I finished, I just went to the gym basically, and that's when it started to become more of a habit.
There's also a lot of professional MMA fighters that are at the highest level that don't start training or learning to fight until their very late teens, or even older in some cases.
Yep.
So do you feel as though this gives you a little bit of an edge? Perhaps the knowledge that you have of martial arts helps you a little bit more in your fights than somebody who's a little bit newer?
I'd say so. I think you can't buy the experience. And thankfully, throughout the years, I've been doing it for 21 odd years now, being involved with it and competing since I was 16, 17. So you can't really buy that. And I feel that when I go into my fights now, I definitely have the edge there.
Yeah.
What I'd say when it comes to MMA is that with the 4-ounce gloves on, anything can happen. You don't necessarily need to have the most experience to win a fight. You just need to, again, throw something big, hope it lands, and and if it does, then fantastic, you've won the fight. I do feel like the skill difference at times when it comes to striking does play in my favor, and it sort of mitigates the risks there.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I go into these MMA fights in particular knowing that anyone can get found out at any point.
Yeah.
But also with MMA, it is mixed martial arts, which means that a lot of the time to this point, I've been facing really strong and solid grapplers with, again, a lot more experience in their part compared to my own.
Yeah.
So
because you come from a kickboxing and Muay Thai background.
Correct.
Which means you can grapple, but your primary focus is striking.
Correct.
And so how do you deal with, top-end grapplers, right? Because when we look at something like the UFC, the number ones in most cases are the Dagestan guys who are incredible wrestlers at the end of the day, right?
No,
is it called Sambo, I believe?
So Sambo is definitely a martial arts part of their world there. And there's a lot of strikes, and there's two types of combat Sambo, non-combat Sambo, but it's really heavy in the grappling. And a lot of the Sambo artists are doing really well at the moment, particularly with the wrestling, but more like Dagestani style wrestling as well.
That's right. What's your approach to dealing with someone like that? Because
at the moment, I'm not in Dagestan. I can't go to Dagestan right now. However, I do have friends who go there quite frequently to learn. It's not something that I'm able to do. Yeah, no, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But what I do at the moment is surround myself with the right team and the right sort of training partners to help simulate that as much as possible.
Yeah.
So for MMA, I do my training at GB Top Team, which is in South London, run by Brad Pickett, Ashley Grimshaw, both UK vets in the MMA space who have a fountain of knowledge, who are constantly imparting it to me. Those two in particular, as well as some of the other coaches as well. I don't want to leave anyone out, such as Mikey Candeo and Barry, etc. So they're all there trying to pass the knowledge to us because they've been there before. So when I was looking for a space to train, when I wanted a transition, I wanted to really select and highlight a few things. I wanted to have coaches who have the experience and knowledge base, who've also been to where I want to go to for the most part. Then have the right training partners who are a lot better than me, particularly in the grappling field, where they can constantly ragdoll me, and show me and provide lessons to me to be learning, and then have the right facilities as well. So my training schedule since shifting over has grappling embedded more days than not to try to improve.
You've also more recently made the transition to trying to pursue completely professional career in martial arts.
Yes.
Not only as an instructor, which you were doing before, but as a fighter.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And when exactly did that transition happen? Because I know that you still focus on teaching and you still dedicate a lot of your time to sharing your knowledge. Yeah. And I'm sure that it helps pay the bills as well. But I think you're pursuing a career as a fighter probably more intensely than, from what I've seen, ever before, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I'd say you're definitely right in that, saying so. So growing up, martial arts was always part of my life. Being a fighter wasn't really an objective, especially when I first started out. It got to a point where there was sort of an interclub, which is an amateur fight. Had that on fairly short notice, did quite well, and enjoyed the feeling of being in the ring. But it was all fun and games for me to that point, especially my first one, for a long time actually, because I'd be training with really good training partners in Bloodline Gym, who are often bigger than me, a lot more experience doing it professionally. And I'd always see these fights as less intense than my sparring rounds at the gym. So I'd go in there without too much of a worry, knowing that I've done the work prior, which prepared me. So for a long time, maybe until I was about 20 or so, when I had a bit of an injury, that gave me time to reflect on what I wanted to do and the fact that I wanted to go into fighting. Now, again, knowing that fighting was never something that I wanted to do, I always wanted to pursue other aspects of my career, that being a physio. I've always wanted to be a physio from a young age, maybe about 13, 14 or so. It just drew to me. So I always knew that I wanted to go to university, which would take...
And you did go to university as well, so we can talk about that.
Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there. But yes, so I went off to university, studied physiotherapy, got my graduate in physiotherapy from King's College London.
And congratulations, King's College is one of the best.
Thank you very much. It's it's definitely a renowned university. So
could you be your own physiotherapist?
Right now?
No, in general.
In general. It depends if I can reach the area, to be honest. Okay. Sometimes you can't reach your back in a certain position. But what it does help me do is have an understanding of what type of injury has or may have occurred, and reduce the risk of it happening. So I feel like there's two types in a broad range of manners of speaking, should I say, is there's two types of injuries. You have your injuries you can control and injuries you can't control. Now, for the most part, with the injuries I can control, I feel like I haven't really had a significant injury for a long time based on my physiotherapy knowledge. The uncontrollables are just things you can't really control. Taking knocks in sparring, this, that, and the other. But I definitely feel like the physiotherapy has helped me as a fighter and coach. And going back to your original question of taking it more seriously, I wanted to establish myself from a career perspective, because I've been in the gym for a long time. I knew that fighting would come to an end at some point. Just looking at the generation above me as such, I knew that they'd finished fighting and then may not have an idea of what they wanted to do. Physiotherapy is what I wanted to do. So I put my fighting career on hold to a degree to make sure that I managed to attain.
Were you still able to actively train?
Yeah. I mean, continued improving my skills and continued competing. I remember a particular funny occasion of being at university, and for physiotherapy, you have to do these placements in various areas to get your experience. Yeah. So I was working in a hospital at the time, and it was a 6-week placement, I believe. And I went there knowing at the time that I was needing to fight in week 3 or week 4 in Slovakia. So
pretty beneficial to work in a hospital if you need to fight. And just go back to your colleagues.
Just in case there were any injuries. So I went into that placement knowing that I was going to fight, but I didn't necessarily mention it to them initially. It was like
that sounds like a good idea.
Just build a bit of rapport first. I'm like, so outside of this physiotherapy thing, I'm a fighter professionally, and then I need to kind of go there. So I managed to get a couple of days off just to be able to fly there, fight, and then come back then the following week. So yeah, it was definitely progression in. Yeah, I did win actually. Yeah, it was thankfully I've had quite a lot of fights. Like in the Muay Thai short kickboxing space, I had a lot more kickboxing fights, but I definitely had some Muay Thai as well. Yeah. Managed to get 33 fights, 28 wins, 5 losses, which is not too bad before transitioning over. But it was definitely, I wanted to look to the future and build for the future, but I definitely was trying to still continue to progress. And I guess the next stage after that was working in the hospitals. Life has a funny way of working out. When I graduated in year 3 of university, I said, okay, I'm going to put physiotherapy on hold. Now I have my degree, and continue to fight. This, I would have been 20, maybe 25 or so, you know?
Yeah.
And then there was one job opportunity that came up, which was quite local to my gym. And that was my last placement. They were saying, okay, we really want you to work here, etc. And I said, okay, well, I'll apply for one job. And if I don't get the job, then it's not the end of the world, because then I continued to fight. Thankfully, I got the job. I say thankfully. In the moment, I wasn't quite thankful for it. But thankfully, I got a job, which meant I was there for a couple of years. Until I decided that actually I need to, if I really want to take fighting seriously, I do need to leave my full-time job, which was...
And I'm guessing you wanted to be surrounded by people in the gym training, right?
Yes.
So, which is the reason why you're probably teaching now.
Yeah.
because that's your, I guess, job outside of fighting. But at the same time, you're surrounded by people training. You're constantly training yourself. And they say that the best teacher is to actually teach, right?
Yeah.
The best way to learn is to teach, rather.
No, I agree with that. You learn so much just by teaching.
I'm sure that, you've probably refined a lot of your skills just by teaching them to other students.
Correct. And it was in amongst the time at university where I was deciding what to do, where I started teaching a bit more. I started teaching more classes, slightly prior to that, but I definitely sort of increased how much I was doing in terms of one-to-ones, etc.
Yeah.
But when you are teaching, you really understand and find out what you don't know. Based on questions from the class and other students. There's definitely, you can see other perspectives. And then it makes you a better fighter and coach as well. And then I decided to leave eventually just after the pandemic, which was an interesting time of life for everyone, where I really fully fledged my career in fighting. By that point, I already had the NHS experience with the physio, so I felt like I was in a good position to leave. And amongst doing the teaching, I still work as a private physio and in that setting. And
so in the future, do you see yourself going back to physiotherapy, or do you see yourself purely focusing on fighting and then beyond that continuing to be some sort of fighter in a way, whether that's having your own school or working as a coach for other athletes?
So again, we don't know the future. We never know the future. But saying that, we definitely try to plan for the future. And I was having a discussion with someone recently about this. It's fighting is what I want to do now. So I put a lot of energy and effort into what I want to do now. Saying that, I don't want it to stop and then not really have a plan after. So I'm still working as a physio. And thankfully, over the years, got to a point where I've got the experience and have now established more of a clinic where I've got a couple of other physios who work for the Fighting Physiotherapy Clinic.
That's great.
The name was an easy fit. I fight. And I'm a physio. So put it together, as well as the other physios who are part of the team are also part of the combat space. So really trying to treat everyone, but really find the niche within combat sports. So yes, my energy is going into fighting, but there's still outside of my training times throughout the day. Growing the clinic, thankfully, we operate out of 2 locations at the moment, both Bloodline and in GB, because there's treatment rooms there, so we do a lot of that. And trying to...
And this is the Fighting Physiotherapy Clinic?
Correct.
Great.
Yeah. So
let's go back into your fighting a little bit. A couple of questions that I'm curious to know the answer to. Who do you think was your toughest opponent that you, however, prospered in the match? So you ended up winning, but was your toughest opponent?
So
let's simplify it. In the last 3 years.
Oh, in the last 3 years?
Sure. Let's go with that, because otherwise it might be too challenging of a question, I don't know.
In the last 3 years. So the last 3 years I've spent, it's all been MMA focused. So all my fights have been MMA. And I'd have to say my most recent one then. So I had a fight about 3 weeks ago, and managed to get the win, thankfully. But there was, leading up to the fight, there was a couple of injuries and whatever else. But again, that's what tends to happen in most camps. However, the biggest factor was the fact that my opponent changed again. Again, not uncommon, but 10 days out, we needed to switch opponents because the other person... got injured, and we had to accept another fight because I wanted to fight before the end of the year.
Can I just pause you there, because anyone who's really into fighting will understand this, but for those who aren't, that can throw you off a lot, because a lot of the time you train for a particular fighting style, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And so when you change opponents so close to the fighting date, of course, it can work both ways. Obviously, they wouldn't have known necessarily that they were fighting you, but you as well may not have trained as effectively as possible for their style of fighting.
Yeah.
Correct?
Correct. You're definitely correct in saying so. But since transitioning to MMA, where there's the obvious strength on my part, in my opinion, my plan doesn't change. My plan is always to keep on the feet and continue to showcase my skill set. Yeah. Naturally, I would assume people are going to try to take me to the floor at some point in the fight. If not straight away, then eventually in the fight. So for me, it's got to a point where the change of opponent doesn't throw me off too much, because ever since transitioning over, again, I must have had about 7 odd fights or so. but no exaggeration, over 20, 25 plus matches. As in, I was matched with opponent, pulled out, matched and pulled out. So I'm at a point now where I accept that there will be a change eventually. So it's not too surprising. It's just as we continue to progress the career, trying to navigate the opponents in a sense.
Does this mean that in a way you're also training for a broader skill set of opponents? So you're not training to fight against specifically strikers or only wrestlers?
Correct.
Definitely a mix, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to improve my skill set and improve my game overall. So that would include my striking, my grappling, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, etc. And if I focus on what I want to improve on, that will naturally make it the hardest possible opponent for the person I'll be fighting again.
My next question is UFC, Bellator.
Yeah.
Any of the big organizations that you've got your eyes on at the moment?
So I feel like if I wasn't in this sport to be at the very top, then I don't think I would want to do it. Only because personally I want to aim high, and that is a motivator in itself to be able to aim for the top. In my opinion, the top promotion right now, and which has been for a long time, has been the UFC. So my goal is to have, in order to get there, is continue to win fights. Continue to win fights in a significant way and spectacular fashion, and then surround myself with people who have the right connections to get me there. Fighting.
Do you have a clear path to that goal? Or at the moment, is it, like you said, continue to win fights, network quite a lot and build connections with people that perhaps are associated or affiliated with the UFC?
Yep.
Or is there a more clearer path where you know that you've got to do A, B, and C, and the chances of then getting the result you want is very high?
So when it comes to fighting in itself, particularly in the industry, there's never really a clear path in anything. You go to Muay Thai, kickboxing, you look at how do you get onto one championship, for example, if you're looking at as a Muay Thai fighter. How do you get onto Glory Kickboxing as a kickboxer? How do you get into the UFC? There's never a clear path, and there never really has been a clear path. When it comes to fighting, there are a number of facets to it. You need to be skilled. You need to have the record.
Yeah.
Then you need to have the right connections. You need to have some sort of buzz around your name. And to that point, there's so many variables that you can't necessarily control. You just need to take one step at a time. And at this point, in terms of my MMA career as such, I need to continue to win fights to get to a point where I can have a conversation with these these organizations such as UFC.
Yeah.
So right now at 4-0 as an MMA fighter, not quite there yet. So I do need a few more wins, and then it's a bit clearer. And the more you do, the more I do this thing, the more likely to be able to have a conversation about it.
You can still use your Muay Thai record to support your, these negotiations in a way, right? Because you may be 4-0 in MMA, but at the same time, you had 33 fights in Muay Thai, right?
Correct.
In kickboxing. So the thing is, what if Bellator, for example, came up to you and offered you, £1 million yearly contract, but then you were tied to their organization, then it would be very difficult to transition into something like UFC.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would consider? And you don't have to provide a clear answer if you don't want to. But
no, of course. So
I'm curious.
So Bellator now has been bought by an organization known as PFL. That was
that's true, actually. Yeah, Jake Paul is very affiliated with them.
He is, but they are the sort of quotation new Bellator in some way, in that they are the other organization trying to rival against the UFC. Bellator was that promotion for a long time.
Yeah.
And you're right, often they will offer a lot more money compared to the UFC.
Yeah.
Because they
did that with Francis Ngannou, for example. That's how they poached him, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. It was a really interesting story. I'd definitely say read up on it, because there was a lot of public negotiation between Ngannou and the UFC. But yeah, they definitely offer a lot more money to people to try to poach them as such. My goal has always been to try to be the best and try to fight the best people. There is an argument to have the best people may not necessarily be in the UFC, but I do feel like on the whole, you definitely got a lot of really, really good fighters that are there. And aside from that, you then have the potential option of building a platform off of that, which may not necessarily give you any monetary value then, but then will help
longevity.
Of course, I
right?
do feel like the UFC do a fantastic job of telling stories. So
Yeah.
they allow you to be invested in the fighter and their journey through a lot of the documentaries and different shows that they do have. So there's a lot of publicity that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Don Davis is the mouthpiece for the PFL. He's very different to Dana White. Dana White is a very interesting character in that he shines in front of the camera, but he's been in front of the camera for 20 odd plus years now, 25 years. So he knows, he has confidence in who he is. He is definitely happy. He's successful in running the company. So he has the history to back him what he's saying. And he has a very interesting mindset, a very positive mindset in some ways of, spearheading the MMA space. Don Davis is a very different character compared to Dana White. Doesn't quite have the same charisma as such as Dana White, which is why he may not necessarily be the right person for it. But the way they're trying to run the company, again, from an outsider's perspective, does seem to be in a slightly different way to the UFC. But what the UFC has showed, if you are going to run a company in a particular way in the MMA space, that's probably the best way to do it, given that they are the organization with the most longevity to this point.
So, as far as I've heard, the PFL, each year, there's sort of like a tournament, if you will, a championship, where they pair fighters together and whoever wins goes to the next stage, whoever wins goes to the next stage. And this way, each year, it's somewhat fair in that the best fighters will always fight the best fighters of that year, regardless of how big your name is. Whereas in the UFC, it's all about matchmaking, you know? Who would, in many cases, it's about who will attract the biggest crowd, right? So which two names paired together will attract the biggest crowd. And of course, they do try to be fair in terms of like giving title shots to the people that deserve them. But I wouldn't say it's as fair as something like a tournament, right? Which is the way it's done in Dragon Ball Z. They have a tournament.
It's the best way.
It's the best way. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, because as, again, an outsider, that sounds like a great idea for the fans. Like every year we have this, tournament where all fighters will fight against each other and the best two will always end up at the very final match.
Yeah, so you're right in saying that they do have that tournament structure. And it's definitely playing into sort of the meritocracy type meritocracy type approach versus the popularity approach, which sometimes the UFC does take. In a tournament, there's so many things that can happen, and there's so many things that will need to play in your favor to go to the next stage. They are trying to, and I think this is the words Don Davis used in the PFL, was they're trying to create the Champions League of mixed martial arts. So the way they're trying to structure it now is that you get different regions, such as Europe. They call it a PFL MENA as well, which is like the Middle East, and then you have Africa, and then Australia, etc. And they're trying to get these regional champions, or I say regional, like in areas, to then progress to the PFL major tournament, which is the big tournament. And then you're right, supposedly you win 3 or 4 fights and you get to the final and you win. Sort
of like either the Euro Cup or the World Cup.
And that's what they're trying to do. And he said he wants to make it the Champions League as such, in terms of anyone from any way can do it. And what they're trying to say is it's not about who you are, it's about how you fight on the night. That is, I think, a great idea on paper, but what they tend to lack with that is the buy-in from fans.
That's right.
As in, if something happens and you get someone you don't know fighting and your favorite fighter's knocked out, you may not necessarily tune into the rest of the tournament if you're specifically watching these big names. Whereas what the UFC is trying to do is they want you to see the fighters you want to see, and they will find a way to get them to the position where you are buying the pay-per-views, etc. And when it comes to fighting, and many other industries, you need to look at it from different perspectives. I look at it from the fighters, but I also need to appreciate where the promoter's coming from, the business side of things.
Of course,
and if it was up to me, I'd say the tournament approach is fantastic. You go in there, it doesn't matter, you don't need to do any publicity, you don't need to do any branding or anything else. You just need to win your fights and put all your attention into fighting. However, we've come to see that approach isn't necessarily working, and other people in the UFC will get pushed because they have a bigger name, not necessarily because they have the better skill set.
I wonder whether there is some sort of middle ground where you do have something like a Champions League, but perhaps it's the curated fighters that have been signed onto the PFL Champions League. And so it's still the names that they are promoting, except there's like a fair tournament each year or every 2 years. And there could always be exhibition fights, right? That people could tune in that were like curated for the fans.
Yeah.
So I could still see that working, but I don't run the PFL or UFC. These are just some thoughts I've been having for a while, and it's great to talk to a fighter about them.
Yeah.
You know?
I think you're right. I think it'll be a great idea to mix the two. It's all about balance.
I wanted to talk a little bit about discipline and motivation. Yeah. Someone like yourself is clearly very disciplined. I'm sure that you're also motivated, but in my opinion, the two are somewhat different. Motivation can kickstart something, can be the catalyst for something, but to sustain it and to eventually get to a very high level, such as you've done yourself, you need discipline.
Yes.
So how do you maintain what you need in order to stay disciplined? And also, what's your opinion on these two categories that people speak about often, discipline versus motivation?
So I think you're right. They are definitely two very different entities. Both are required to go anywhere far. You definitely need to have a motivation as to what's getting you up and going from there. But then when you don't have that, the discipline of setting out and going with a plan is definitely more important in some ways. If I had to pick one out of the two, I think discipline is slightly more important than motivation, because once you set your goal, whatever it may be, it doesn't actually matter if you don't get up and go after every single time you can. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to go with a sort of an aggressive meatheaded approach of just trying to hammer home every single time. You need to be kind to yourself in that sense. So for me, I train a lot. I train all year round, regardless of whether I'm fighting or not, because my motivation is to go, or my motivation to get to UFC or fight on that stage. Sometimes when there's a discussion in my head when I don't necessarily want to train, because sometimes I don't want to train. Yeah. You need to navigate strategies to stop yourself from having these conversations, in my opinion. So as soon as I start discussing to myself, I feel really tired, or I've got a different reason to it, the conversation's cut short. Like, do you want to get to the UFC? Do you want to, is that your goal? If it's still your goal, then the conversation ends there. Just go on the bike.
That's a really interesting approach that I haven't really heard before.
Okay. Because it's sometimes to achieve something, you need to put in the work. No one's going to hand anything to you. Life isn't necessarily fair like that. And we can't just sit back and expect people to do things. But for everything that we want, there is a cost. And for me, if I want to get there, the cost is putting in the work now when I don't necessarily need to. People may frame it in a few different ways, such as non-negotiables or other terminology. But the reality is, if you want something, you need to work for it. Yeah. And there's a lot of factors that come into play as well, as we discussed before, but that core element needs to happen.
How much you want something is determined on the days when you don't want to do it.
Yes.
So on the days when you feel tired, when you're unmotivated, if you really want to achieve a certain goal, you'll still push through it and you'll discipline yourself.
100%. I agree. But it's really changing the approach. And again, you can use different strategies. You can discuss how blessed you are to be able to train every single day, whereas some people can't. And that's sometimes a nice strategy, and going from actually just stop complaining and get on with it is another one. Sometimes that when your body is hurting and you have done the hard work to this point, be like, okay, do you know what? Let's take this session off. All you're going to do is turn up, because turning up will give you so much more than not turning up on the day. It doesn't need to be a fantastic session. Sometimes it's about using knowing that you could turn up and perform on your worst day is such a good comfort when you're in a fight or when you lean up to a fight and you know that things are going tough. My last fight, for example, was between the rounds. I was getting a bit tired. I was like, actually, I've got 5 more minutes. I've done more than 5 minutes on the mat so many times. I've been in this point before. And that really will give you a good focus.
In a way, that's motivation, right? To
100%.
Keep going. Yeah.
Because you've done it before. It's possible.
And to know that you're, I guess, nowhere near your limits, even if you feel like you are, your body is capable of so much more.
Of course, I agree with that.
It's interesting that you just mentioned, even if you feel really tired, even if it's an off day, still show up and just take the session off, but show up. So Does that mean that even when you're not training and you need your body to rest, you might still show up to the gym to build that habit of, I'm going to be there, I'm going to be surrounded by this environment that I feel like I need to be surrounded by to succeed. And I'm still going to somewhat learn in some way, train in some way, even if it's not physically demanding.
Yeah. So if it's a structured session, I'll turn up, I'll do this session with a slightly different objective. You know, in that, let's say it's a grappling focus session. My focus that day may not necessarily be to take everyone down. It could be actually, you know, don't get taken down, don't get submitted. Make sure you, as soon as you hit the floor, you get back to your feet, etc. So using the energy sparingly, but in the right times. If, for example, someone's injured and they can't actually train, rather than being physically and emotionally tired, and they can't physically train, turning up means you can still learn so much. You can learn through observation. You can learn just by being in the environment. And again, knowing and telling yourself that actually, I can turn up on these days, which will, again, be a really good fuel source for the future.
I just want to ask, how important is also understanding when you need rest? So when you have that mindset of being very disciplined, it can sometimes also push you to work your body when you should be resting your body instead. And of course, as someone who also has a degree in physiotherapy, you probably understand this more so than your average person. But I'd love to hear from you how important you think this is.
It's vitally important, which is, so I often have an internal conversation between the fighter and the physio about, for example, you're a bit tired, so you should probably take a rest. And then that's what the physio is saying. And first, like, well, I kind of need to do this work, so, you know, stop talking for a second. And it's always a toss-up. I'm fortunate enough to be able to have that conversation. Sometimes as a younger fighter, we don't have the opportunity or the knowledge base to know this. So we just constantly hammer home and then often get loads of different injuries. Typically, a fighter without the physio knowledge will then get a bit older and realize, actually, I need to train a bit smarter. For me, I've sort of was able to skip a few years in that sense, where I went to uni, got the degree, I understand the importance of recovery. So I've implemented recovery in my own training week. But also, I think one of the key things I could say to anyone when it comes to training is train with a structure. And if you follow the structure and the plan, it means you can then change things. If everything is quite sporadic or chaotic, you don't know what to control. There's so many variables you can't control. Whereas for me, I know exactly when my rest day is, I know exactly when my lighter sessions are, and I know when my hard sessions are. And that's good for the mind as well as the body, because I know when I need to push and when I can take a bit of time off. But that in itself is one of the key factors in longevity. I've been doing martial arts for a long time, and thankfully haven't got too many major injuries based off of that.
Listen to your body, but also listen to your instructor, to your coach.
Yeah, because if you don't,
your sensei.
Usually you get a bit more work.
All right, let's get on to just a couple final quick topics. So I'm going to throw out some names, and I'd like to get your immediate reaction to them. Muhammad Ali.
Inspiration.
Mike Tyson.
Oh, savage.
Jake Paul.
Entertainer.
Anderson Silva.
Oh, legend.
Israel Adesanya.
Innovator.
GSP.
Legend. I would say GOAT, but he's the legend. He's not quite my GOAT, but, you know, he's definitely up there.
Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Undeniable.
Conor McGregor.
The best entertainer around.
Paddy Pimblett.
Oh, interesting character.
Quite interesting, right?
Yeah, quite interesting character.
Entertaining to watch.
Entertaining to watch.
Yeah.
And actually, as a fighter, really good.
Not bad.
No, he's good. Yeah. Again, there's different aspects to MMA. Fantastic on the floor, I'd say.
John Jones.
Oh, arguably the GOAT. He's vicious.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I managed to see him live actually once, and his intention behind his shots is very good.
I've only seen him fight on TV.
Yeah.
I do feel a different kind of energy from him than I do with other fighters. Like a certain level of focus that I don't really get the sense that other fighters have in the same way, at least.
There's a bit more viciousness and potentially malice behind his shots. He's there to hurt you. Yeah. And again, we're fighters, you know, but he definitely has a bit more compared to most that I've seen.
Tell me about your clothing brand. I see you're wearing something quite stylish on you today.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So this is the Ali range, or the Aspire Lead Inspire range, hence the abbreviation. It's something that I've been thinking about making for a very, very long time. It's been in the works for many years, mostly because in the industry I feel like there's been a reduction in quality and increase in prices, as most things are these days. So when I was starting this, the aim was to have good quality clothing for training and for leisure wear. So active and leisure wear, make sure that it's high quality, and really having a martial arts emphasis to it. So currently we just have the oversized hoodie, the joggers and t-shirts, and we are branching into the performance range this year. So definitely staying true to that. We're going to go for some dry fitting t-shirts and some compression gear as well, just to again know that you are wearing premium quality clothing, whilst having a positive impact on the environment. Hence the name. It's like I personally always try to surround myself with people who are inspiration to me, and I aspire to be like them as well. And I feel like if we can all focus on trying to be a positive change, it then means that we'll have a knock-on effect on someone else. They can then have the similar thing and hopefully create a positive environment.
And what makes this special? So you're talking about premium quality. Obviously, it's inspired by your fighting and your physiotherapy career. But what makes this special for everyone out there listening? Why should they go out and buy specifically from your clothing brand?
That's a very, very good question. So aside from wanting to support, support
your local fighters who will be world champions.
That's the goal. Aside from that, it's what I've been told in terms of reviews. It's actually the key thing is premium quality, and that's really the USP I'm trying to go for.
And I guess that's because you care.
Yes.
You genuinely care. Like, you've been working on this for a long time. You wanted to have a quality product rather than just call up a supplier and make you some t-shirts quickly, right?
Exactly. And I feel like that's it's definitely not the approach I wanted to take. And because again, things are expensive these days, and I want to make sure that anything that I attach myself to will have a high quality to it. So rest assured, it's going to be very comfortable. It's going to be very high quality as well when it comes to that.
And where can people purchase this online, if you can repeat that once more?
Yes, so aspireleadinspire.com.
AspireLeadInspire.com.
Correct.
And finally, what's coming up in your life? Any big fights that you want to make everyone aware of?
Yes. So we're currently in early 2025. I'm hoping to have a really positive and busy 2025 when it comes to fighting. The first objective is to fight on the 21st of February. That's going to be a Friday night in London. It'll be at London O2, so hopefully be headlining the event, as I'll be fighting for the lightweight title there. So if you did want to come down and
I believe that's an exclusive.
That is an exclusive, actually. It's an exclusive. It's not out there yet, but the goal is to be a fighter for the lightweight title. And if you want to come down and support, which I always appreciate, just drop me a message on Instagram, and then we can start building from there, really.
Fantastic. So that will be the O2 in Greenwich, lightweight title, 21st of February, 2025.
Correct.
I'm very excited for you. I'm sure that you will prosper, and I'm really excited to see where your career goes. You seem like someone who's very dedicated, very disciplined. Probably more important than anything, seems to have a kind heart. You always seemed very polite, very kind, helping out around the gym, really caring about the people that are there. And I think that's very likely one of the reasons why you will go very high in your career.
Well, I appreciate you saying so. I was always taught, treat people how you want to be treated. You know, it's such a cliche saying, but I definitely try to live by that as much as I can.
And finally, where can people follow you? Where can they find you?
So on Instagram primarily. So Yusuf Ali Taleb will be where it's all the fight socials. If there's related to injury and performance, go to the Fighting Physiotherapy Clinic. Although on Instagram it's the Fighting Physiotherapist currently. We're going to make that change. And then for all your clothing needs, head over to Aspire Lead Inspire.
Yousef, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me.